Um, so as we thought about the issue of immigration, clearly it's a legal issue. And I was lucky enough to meet the next speaker, my friend Bill Hing, when we were on a committee for the Institute of Medicine on immigration and families and child health. And I followed Bill's career for a long time, and he is sort of the preeminent lawyer that works on immigration. He has several books, and you can look at online for them, but one that talks about the sort of the moral compass of our country and immigration. How do we look at kids particularly, and what are the issues we need to think about? I think at this time in our nation, we are being required to have reflection about what America means. What does it mean about being an immigrant? And how do we balance the legal aspects with the issues of being human, caring about kids and caring about families? And that's a challenge, I think. So I'm really honored to have Bill Hing to talk to us about this. This is not an easy issue. We're not taking one side or the other, but at the end of the day, this conference was put together with a purpose to better understand what we can do. So, Bill?
I didn't know we weren't supposed to take sides here. So.
That's just me. That's just my organization. They're just one side.
Okay. No, I can run it. Why don't you just start the, and it's this?
This works, it's the arrows. That's to move forward.
All right. This moves forward? Sorry.
I think we just move this.
Okay, so I think I'll use this microphone. So the day before the election, I was at a conference not unlike this at UCLA, talking about the future of Latinos in the United States, and it was a group that was primarily a mixture of academics and community-based folks. And we were frankly talking about how we were going to be working with Hillary's White House, and she was going to be closing down the family detention centers in Texas, and but 48 hours later, the day after the election, I got a call from a former colleague of mine at UC Davis, Afra Ashurapur, who also lives in San Francisco. And she said, Bill, can you come over to our school, Alvarado Elementary School? This is on the Wednesday. And she said it was because there were families and parents and kids coming to school crying in fear of being deported. I'm sure many of you have heard very similar accounts. And listen, I've done Know Your Rights presentations for many, many, many years. But since that day, my students and I have averaged at least 2 a week. Just a few weeks ago, they went up and down Highway 99 in the Central Valley doing Know Your Rights presentations. Probably one of the more interesting ones we did was just up the street here in Redwood City at a car wash, where there were 60 workers that we did a training on. So things have changed. What I want to do today is mix in a little bit of policy with law. So this is these are the topics that I want to address. So as we know, that not only candidate Trump, but actually President Trump actually has definitely increased interior enforcement. And these are some of the ways in which that has been done. There's a much broader definition of criminal immigrant in his executive orders. His definition of criminal immigrant actually now includes anyone who's been arrested. No waiting for a conviction. And That's a qualitative difference between the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Yes, the Obama administration did deport people that were not criminals, but they were definitely deprioritized, and it kind of depended on the idiosyncrasies of the various ICE field office directors on how they implemented the prosecutorial discretion memos, but usually they backed off of people that were not convicted. Today, they've been unleashed. The field offices kind of have been waiting for this opportunity, so that so it's clear that that this difference between what I have in the second bullet here, prosecutorial discretion, just isn't implemented the way it was under the Obama administration, where there was a deprioritization. That means that there are many, many more collateral arrests today than there were under the Obama administration. Again, there was a reason why President Obama was labeled the deporter-in-chief, and he was. And that was primarily because the numbers of folks that were deported under his 8 years, depending on how you counted, outnumbered those who were deported under the Bush administration. But what usually happened was that the types of interior, I'm actually leaving out border enforcement this time. The interior enforcement was primarily under the Obama administration. It was primarily the result of partnerships and cooperation between local law enforcement officials and the and ICE, and so that there were something like 2,500 arrests interiorly per week under the Obama administration, 2,500. And the vast majority were because of partnerships and relationships between local police and ICE. That's changed, and I'll get to that in a minute. A collateral arrest is when you show up at somebody's door, workplace, or apartment building with a name, and that name can be taken from a number of sources. People that didn't show up at their deportation hearings, people that who have been convicted of a crime that are known to be a deportable crime. They show up at the person's door, and while they are there, they ask other people in the building or at the work site, for heaven's sakes, even customers, what is their immigration status? And if people blurt out that they're undocumented or that they weren't born here, that's all that's needed to institute deportation proceedings against someone. All they need to know is that you are not born here. They don't even need to know that you don't have documents. All they need to know is that you were not born here, and they can institute deportation proceedings against you. The burden shifts to you in a deportation hearing once there's an admission that you were not born here in the United States. So those are what we label collateral arrests. There's definitely been an unleashing of ICE agents. When the Obama administration issued 3 different memorandums of enforcement, the most well-known one was the DACA memo, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and there were other prosecutorial discretion memos. There were 3 memos that were issued. 3 times the ICE union sued the president for not allowing them to do their work. All 3 times, those cases were thrown out of court. But it's an indication of their leaning, and their leaning is towards enforcement. So I believe that there's now a Doberman effect and that they've been unleashed. What we actually haven't seen yet are Bush-style workplace raids. George Bush's raids were gun-toting, high-profile. December 12th, 2006 was his biggest one. The raids of Swift Premium meatpacking companies across the United States, 6,000 people arrested on one day. That may come. That may come. It'll come with racial profiling. There'll be lawsuits. They'll be stopped. But some of that may happen. President Obama more did what we called silent raids, which were briefcase-toting ICE agents who came in and did ICE audits of I-9 forms, and then people got notices that they were fired. So what we have seen is that in the first 100 days of the new administration, there's been a 37% increase over the same period, or about 400 arrests per day. In 2012, however, under Obama, there were 700 arrests per day. But after a new enforcement priority that was issued by his then Secretary of DHS, in 2014, the arrests went down, and after that, there were fewer interior arrests that occurred. And I'll get to this again in a minute, but we see the result of that, namely that some folks that were not being prioritized have all of a sudden been arrested and deported because now everyone's a priority who's undocumented. Okay, so given the demographics that Jeff Passell has given us and that Fernando alluded to in the introduction, that means that that children are very much affected by these enforcement operations. And we know of widespread fear. These types of headlines were very common. The second to the last bullet there, I alluded to the school service providers. There's an NPR story driving in this morning about a decrease in cooperation between immigrant communities and local law enforcement. People are afraid to report crimes, to be witnesses of crimes. We know there are fewer people applying for food stamps, fewer people applying for benefits that they actually are available to. There's a study that was done by USC where they actually measured the increased fear in Los Angeles County. And so we know that the fear is there. So let me talk about a few selected legal policy type issues that affect children in particular. One is DACA, and I'll go over that in a minute. I do want to talk about unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied children, depending on your terminology. Jeff alluded a little bit to birthright citizenship. Cancellation or removal, which I'll get to, has to do with a relief from deportation for undocumented immigrants. So you can apply for a certain relief if you've lived here long enough and you meet certain qualifications, and the effect of PTSD on all of this. So believe it or not, this is actually from a different slide that was from a different presentation. I was explaining to Fernando's daughter, Julia, who's one of my students, that I just moved from one talk to another, and this is kind of interesting. Okay, so what is DACA? That was a slide that John Blazer helped me. John is going to talk later. We were talking one day about why is there so much more fear today than before, and these were some of the reasons that we came up with. Sorry, I am. I cannot attribute any of this to John Blazer because he's now a spokesperson for the Attorney General. Do I need to go over this? People know what DACA is. It's deferred action for childhood arrivals. They're undocumented children that came here and met these qualifications. The cynic in me will tell you that the reason that Barack Obama did this is because the Dreamers went to talk to Marco Rubio in the summer of 2012, and if they had not done that, Barack Obama would not have issued this DACA memo, okay? But since then, 750,000 students have benefited from DACA. They get 2 years extensions, they get employment authorization. Very, very important, that last bullet is that they get something called the ability for advanced parole, which means they can leave and come back. And now I'm being very technical. If you entered the country without inspection, which many undocumented families have, you cannot complete your green card process in the United States if you enter the country without inspection. Leaving on advanced parole allows you to leave and come back and qualify to finish your paperwork here. If a DACA, for example, is married as a U.S. citizen, you can complete your paperwork here and magically not have to be subject to something called a 10-year bar. Most undocumented folks who live in the United States for more than a year, if they leave the country, they cannot come back for 10 years. So if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to talk about that at the break. Can it be terminated? Yes. DACA was implemented by executive order. It can be taken away by executive order. Interestingly, President Trump did not fulfill his campaign promise of canceling DACA. In fact, not only did he not cancel DACA, he also did not cancel something called DAPA, the Deferred Action for Parents of U.S. Citizens, which was hung up in court, which the Republicans all opposed. It's still in courts, but President Trump actually has not terminated that program either. It's still a viable issue. So we're telling people that if you haven't applied for DACA, people are now qualifying. It's risky because you're turning over your demographic information, your address to people. If you have applied for DACA, if you haven't already, then go ahead and apply for extensions. Unaccompanied children. When I left UC Davis, whatever it was, 6-7 years ago, to get off the freeway and teach at USF, I promised that I'd never start another immigration clinic again. I ran an immigration clinic at Stanford. I ran an immigration clinic at Davis. Now I opened one at USF because of the unaccompanied children. In 2014, the surge of children from Central America who were being detained by the Obama administration, high priority deportation for the Obama administration. I'm so upset at Trump because he threw me off on my writing agenda. I'm in the middle of writing a book attacking the Obama administration for their treatment of unaccompanied children. But they primarily qualify for asylum and SIJS. And Jeff, I want to tell you that folks that are representing unaccompanied children across the country, we have a 70% success rate. So they're not going to show up in the large numbers of undocumented. They're getting green cards. Okay, so special immigrant juvenile status is a special relief for folks that have fled and because of and have separated from a parent because of abuse, abandonment, or neglect. I'm going to get to that. Birthright citizenship, as Jeff Passell alluded to, it's a 14th Amendment right. You're born here. Very controversial, of course, even if parents are undocumented. It's been the law since there was a challenge to a Chinese person back in the 1800s. Cancellation or removal is something I do want you to be familiar with, because this is where healthcare professionals really become very important. For anyone who's undocumented, if you've been here for 10 years, you're a person of good moral character, and you can satisfy an exceptional, extreme, unusual hardship requirement to the spouse, parent, or child who's a citizen, you can actually get lawful permanent resident status. Here's the problem. The problem is with the hardship requirement. It's very difficult to satisfy it. Here's an example of somebody who was denied hardship. Single woman, 2 citizen kids, father contributed, siblings were unlawful, children. The Board of Immigration Appeals said that's not enough hardship. So the case that is deemed the outer extreme of when you can get hardship satisfied is this case. It's cited over and over again in denials of cancellation. You don't have it as bad as this person, okay? And we are constantly, immigration service providers are constantly looking for help and creative thinking on how we can show this hardship to the spouse, children. Usually it's U.S. citizen children. And there are some unscrupulous immigration lawyers out there who prey on families who have disabled children. Somebody at the Lucille Packard Hospital, I don't know if she's in the audience, told me about a case where a situation where she went to a conference and there was some shyster immigration lawyer who was saying, if you pay me $10,000, if you got a kid who's mentally disabled, I'll get that kid a green card. Listen, you never want to affirmatively present yourself and expose yourself to a deportation hearing. Because the chances are you're going to lose and you'll get deported. But for those people who have been taken into custody, then you do try to apply for a cancellation. And we need help in coming up with arguments of the effects of deportation on children, on U.S. citizen children. The clients that we have at our clinic, again, all from Central America, pretty much mostly unaccompanied children, although we have many cases involving women who are fleeing domestic violence from Central America. The kids are usually fleeing gang or cartel violence. The women are usually fleeing a combination of that, but a lot of domestic violence. You actually can't apply for asylum fleeing domestic violence. Post-traumatic stress is, they're suffering from it. And every semester I bring in a campus psychologist to treat my students who are interviewing these clients day in, day out. And you hear the worst stories possible of what these children and women have gone through. Just imagine the worst thing, and it's happened. And so vicariously, our students, the attorneys that work for me, also suffer. But my main point is with respect to the clients. When you apply for asylum, the Board of Immigration the Immigration Court and the Board of Immigration Appeals have a very strict, unrealistic expectation of how a child who might be, they don't expect a 4-year-old to testify, but they do expect 12, 13, 14-year-olds to testify, and certainly their parents. They expect them to tell very clean, consistent stories. And it takes us 5, 6, 10 interviews before clients will tell us everything that happened for obvious reasons. And so we are very concerned that immigration judges are requiring too much. And so we often accompany our briefs, for our hearing briefs, with professional evaluation of the clients and how their PTSD affects the way that they're testifying. And some of it's cultural. This is a cliche, but it's clients not looking directly at the judge, it's clients looking down, it's mannerisms that are not understood, it's immigration judges coming from one background and not understanding the background of the clients, and so it affects credibility, and over and over and over and over again, the immigration hearings, especially those that are unrepresented, because there are a lot of these clients that go unrepresented, are denied, and we pick up the cases on appeal in some of those situations. So I actually am going to stop there, but I do want to just reiterate how important it is for us to work together on these issues, because again, I have a little bit of a distorted experience in the last 2 or 3 years with the client base. It's primarily women and children, and so I'm constantly concerned with the effect of enforcement on those entities. And I don't think, given what the Trump administration is doing, I don't think it's going to end quickly. In fact, I predict that we're going to see larger scale enforcement efforts, and some people are afraid, we haven't seen it yet, that the Bay Area has a target on its back because of its sanctuary positions. I'm not so sure. We'll see. But why don't I stop there, and let's see if you have any questions.
So let me just add to Bill's discussion. In California, we have someplace between 1 in 6 and 1 in 8 child in all of California that has an undocumented parent. So if you think about it, I'm seeing kids in clinic. Every 6th kid may have an undocumented parent that's under this kind of stress. So this is really critical for us in pediatrics. Questions?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if you could speak about something that actually Dr. Mendoza taught me at a conference recently, which was actually whether the courts where these proceedings are happening, if they're really judges who are making these decisions, how they are involved with our regular legal system, and then also in the Bay Area or places near us, whether these are public proceedings that we can bear witness to, and also if there are other kind of details to those proceedings that you think are relevant for us to understand as providers for these families.
The public is not, cannot attend any of these proceedings because they involve asylum. So there's a special code of federal regulations that bars anyone, media or anyone who's not associated with the case, from coming in. You can get permission to come in, but both parties and the immigration judge have to grant that permission. The special immigrant juvenile status involves going to state court first to get an order of guardianship or a custody order. And again, those are usually also confidential. But again, you can ask permission. When you apply for asylum, unaccompanied children get 2 bites at the apple. They first get to apply at an asylum office, which is not an immigration judge. It's an administrator. It's a person. There's not a prosecutor. It's an immigration officer who does the interview. You can't, the child or whoever's applying for asylum can be accompanied by a representative. You have to provide an interpreter at the asylum office, although there's, strangely enough, there's someone listening from Baltimore or someplace who can interrupt if they think that you're misinterpreting something. That immigration officer, I would say more than half of them are lawyers, but some are not lawyers. They're just trained, and they are they very much are trained in learning about country conditions, how to assess credibility. They're not trained very well on PTSD effect. that type of thing. In the immigration court, if you get denied, if you don't get granted asylum at the asylum office, then you go to the immigration court. Or if you're an adult and you are arrested, then you have to go straight to the immigration court to apply for asylum. The immigration court, I would say now, there was a time when I started practice when some of the immigration judges were not lawyers, but they pretty much are all lawyers now. And the Trump administration is going to affect this, but historically, those appointed to be immigration judges are very diverse in terms of background, including former legal services attorneys who are immigration judges. I predicted that will change, that the Trump administration, it's Jeff Sessions actually, the Attorney General, will be not picking folks to appoint to be immigration judges that used to work at a legal aid office. The judges, again, their assessment of credibility is critical. And without getting too technical, when you apply for asylum, you're supposed to get the benefit of the doubt because it's a humanitarian relief. You're not supposed to have to prove by preponderance that you will be persecuted. The language is, if a reasonable person would fear persecution, it should be granted. I believe that most judges do not apply that standard correctly. And so we should be fighting for better training on how to implement asylum law. This is crazy because the asylum law has been with us since 1980, but that still needs to be done. So they're not federal judges, they're administrative law judges, and the quality changes. There's this terrible, terrible case where when you appear, you have a right to counsel, but not at government expense. Okay, the government doesn't appoint an attorney for you. If you're lucky, there's a legal aid attorney who might help you. There's a lawsuit on behalf of unaccompanied children that's pending in Seattle that argues that children should be appointed counsel, because how can they represent themselves? There's an immigration judge who was deposed in that lawsuit who said, and he's a trainer of immigration, you can Google this, he said, oh, I can teach a 3-year-old enough to apply for asylum. He said that in a deposition, and so it's no big deal that they don't have representation.
Other questions?
Hi, I had a question about public benefits and how that affects immigrant families in different applications.
Mm-hmm.
At pediatric clinics, we often advise families in applying for WIC and SNAP, and we've seen decreases in that because of fears of being identified with demographic information. But even beyond that, my question was about, there's anecdotal reporting that receiving these kinds of benefits will affect your chances of future citizenship or something potentially like the cancellation of removal. So I was wondering if you could speak about that, if receiving those benefits actually affects.
Right, that's a good question. The first thing, you're right, that there's reporting between the public officials and ICE, that we've not seen that. We've not seen that somebody who's behind a desk is going to call ICE up and say, oh, this person who's undocumented is applying for benefits. We haven't seen that. Hopefully we won't. But yeah, there is an issue with respect to an undocumented person receiving some type of public benefit, because let's say that person somehow qualifies for an immigrant visa. They have to satisfy something. There's like 30 some odd grounds of inadmissibility, and one of them is if you're likely to become a public charge. And so if there's evidence that you used public assistance in the past, that's evidence that you are likely to become a public charge and you can be denied. And in cancellation of removal is a discretionary relief, which means that the immigration judge can take a lot of factors into consideration on whether or not he or she would grant cancellation. So conceivably, a hard-nosed immigration judge might not like the fact that somebody applied for benefits. And so, honestly, I think that I would err on the side of not applying if I'm undocumented.
Jonathan?
Here, apropos to your comment about the well-intentioned but uninformed judge on Google, how might opportunities be created for organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics and others to offer education to immigration officials, immigration judges, and so on about child development, and to some degree about the relationship then with family systems and so on, which may have a bearing absolutely on the whole process?
I think that's a great idea, and I can put you in touch. For example, the president of the organization is the American Immigration Judges Association, is local, actually. A good friend, Dana Marks, and she could probably help put together trainings and try to get them proliferate. She's very open-minded. Before she was an immigration judge, she and I litigated a case and on asylum, actually, that went to the Supreme Court that we won. And so she's into that type of, she wants more respect, to be honest with you, as an immigration judge. But she's also interested in better training. So I think she would be open to that. Yeah.
Bill, can I clarify something about public charge?
Go ahead.
Just to make sure that people understand, nothing actually has changed about public charge with the new administration. There was a draft executive order that was put out there that got leaked that would have made dramatic changes that didn't ever actually get signed. So nothing has changed with the new administration. And that means that the guidance that's out there that still stands, which is that neither nutrition assistance like food stamps or WIC or health insurance or Medi-Cal or medical coverage counts as against you in public charge. Doesn't affect cancellation or any other discretionary relief, but just in terms of the public charge determination, that guidance has not yet changed.
Right. Thanks, Stacey. Yeah, I'm not going to, we can debate some of that, but yeah. I wasn't talking about the policy proposal, but yeah.
I wonder if you think, I think it's Senate Bill 54 to make California a sanctuary state will pass, and if so, beyond the symbolic meaning, what difference you think that'll make?
I think it actually will pass. So Senate bill, or it's either SB 54 or AB 54, maybe it's the same thing. It would declare California a sanctuary state, which would prohibit the use of local and state funds to be used in cooperation with ICE enforcement. And it doesn't bar ICE from enforcing, it just bars counties that are not already sanctuary counties. It bars those counties from expending local funds to help ICE enforce. And so it would be beneficial. It's not just symbolic.
I'd like to go back to the previous person who was mentioning about the trainings. It seems that there's so much literature out there on the adverse effects of trauma on child development that we can incorporate both the Academy of Pediatrics and also mental health professionals, and not only bringing trainings, but my hope or concern is that, are they also working with lawyers as well, both in court, out of court, to do the evaluations. So it seems like a lot of overlay or interplay can bring both the physical and the mental health people together, because the literature is there. It's just training. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that we can check off as a potential follow-up, Fernando.
Yes.
Right.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up to Stacy's comment about the public charge question. We'll be talking about medical legal partnership later, but for those that are at Packard and Stanford, we have a partnership with Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County to help families. So if we saw that family in clinic that had the question about applying or wasn't applying, we would actually refer them to family advocacy program to understand, because for many families, they actually don't have a path to citizenship. So we wouldn't want them to be avoiding using public benefits that are really essential to the health of their child because they think someday they might be adjusting their immigration status.
One more question.
So I
I serve on the San Mateo County Commission for Juvenile Delinquency and Prevention. And starting in January, our colleagues in the Office of Education started reporting absenteeism in the schools. And we don't have data in terms of what's happening at a state level or what, I know like the work you talked about the car wash in Redwood City, many of the families show up at places like that with questions like that, but at a programmatic level as well as from a data perspective, what can you share?
What can I share with respect to?
What is known in terms of data, and beyond, I mean, like we fund the Legal Aid Society, but it's backed up. So what other programmatic solutions are there, or workshops like what your students and you organize?
Well, Know Your Rights workshops are very easy to arrange. There are excellent service providers throughout the Bay Area who can put those on. In terms of data as to enrollment declines or lack of participation, what I understand is just what I read in the paper and see reports of coming through my email every day that yeah, there's genuine fear, and that's manifested itself in people hesitating to, even in some cases, I'm not exaggerating, leaving home. And so it's definitely something but I do try to remind folks at these Know Your Rights presentations, although we can always be proven wrong, that the chances of actually being at the wrong place at the wrong time is small. And so we view Know Your Rights presentations as kind of earthquake preparedness or something to get ready, but it's something you have in your arsenal, but the chances of having to use it is probably small. Yeah, the sad thing about Know Your Rights trainings is now there's a component in all of them now of having a family preparation plan and signing guardianship papers or at least documents indicating to the school who else can come pick up your kid if you get deported.
Good. Yeah. All right, so we have a 10-minute break. We're going to try to keep real close on time here, so 10 minutes and we'll restart. Thank you, Bill.